I sat at our old oak dining table, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the worn wooden surface. It should have been a peaceful start to the day, but the tension in the room was suffocating. My husband, Eric, kept pacing back and forth on the creaky floorboards, his irritation palpable in every heavy step. The argument from the night before still hung in the air like a thick fog that refused to dissipate. Eric's sister, Marie, had demanded financial help yet again. It wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. She had asked for my credit card to cover her so-called emergencies, which usually turned out to be shopping sprees or impulsive purchases. When I firmly refused, it set off a chain reaction that culminated in Eric's fury. I took a sip of my coffee, the bitter taste matching the atmosphere in the room. Eric's pacing made me anxious, but I tried to maintain a calm exterior. I could feel his eyes boring into me, silently demanding that I change my mind, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. This had gone on for far too long. "Eric," I said softly, breaking the tense silence. "We need to talk about this rationally. We can't keep enabling Marie's irresponsible spending habits. It's not fair to us, and it's not helping her in the long run." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his face flushed with anger. "Not fair? Not helping?" Eric scoffed. "Lena, she's my sister. We have to help family when they're in need. How can you be so selfish?" I flinched at his words but stood my ground. "It's not selfish to set boundaries, Eric. We've helped her countless times before, and nothing has changed. She needs to learn to manage her own finances." Eric's nostrils flared, and I could see the vein in his forehead pulsing. "You don't understand. You've never had siblings. You don't know what it's like to have that responsibility." His words stung, but I pushed past the hurt. I may not have siblings, but I understand responsibility, and right now, our responsibility is to our own financial stability. We can't keep draining our resources to bail Marie out of her self-imposed crises. For a moment, Eric seemed to deflate slightly. I thought maybe, just maybe, my words had gotten through to him. But then his eyes hardened, and I knew I was wrong. "You're going to give Marie your credit card," he said, his voice low and threatening. "She's coming here later today, and you're going to hand it over with a smile on your face. Do you understand me?" A chill ran down my spine at his tone, but I refused to back down. "No, Eric, I won't do that. We need to help Marie in other ways that will actually benefit her in the long run. Maybe we could help her create a budget or find a financial advisor." I never got to finish my sentence. Without warning, Eric lunged for his mug of coffee on the counter and hurled it at my face. Time seemed to slow as I watched the dark liquid arc through the air. Then, in a split second, scalding coffee splashed across my cheek, neck, and blouse. Pain seared through my skin as I gasped in shock. The mug clattered to the floor, shattering into pieces that scattered across the linoleum. I instinctively raised my hands to my face, feeling the heat radiating from my skin. Eric roared, his voice echoing off the kitchen walls. "You'll pay for this. Marie is coming here later, and you better give her your damn credit card, or get the hell out." His words were like venom burning through me even more than the hot coffee. I stared at him in disbelief, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The man I had married, the man I once loved with all my heart, had now shown me the depths of his entitlement and cruelty. Trembling, I wiped at my face with a kitchen towel. The sting of the coffee was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I watched as Eric stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him with such force that the framed photos on the wall rattled. For a few moments, I sat frozen, staring at the mess scattered across the table and floor. Coffee dripped slowly from the edge of the table, forming a small puddle on the floor. Shards of the broken mug glinted in the morning light. It was as if the shattered ceramic represented the broken pieces of our marriage. As the initial shock began to wear off, a realization started to form within me. This house, once our shared sanctuary, wasn't my home anymore. It had become an emotional battleground, a place where I no longer felt safe or respected. The walls that once held our dreams and aspirations now seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with the weight of Eric's anger and Marie's demands. I stood up shakily, my coffee-soaked blouse clinging uncomfortably to my skin. As I looked around the kitchen, memories flooded my mind. Eric and I painting the walls together, laughing as we got more paint on ourselves than the walls. Our first Thanksgiving dinner in this house, when we burned the turkey but still had a wonderful time. The countless mornings we had shared coffee at this very table, talking about our dreams for the future. But those memories now felt tainted, overshadowed by the ugliness of the present. The laughter had been replaced by shouts, the warmth by cold indifference, and the love by, what? Control. Manipulation. I wasn't even sure anymore. I made my way to the bathroom, wincing as I examined my reflection in the mirror. My cheek was red and irritated from the hot coffee, and I could already see the beginnings of a bruise forming. As I gently cleaned my face, I couldn't help but wonder how we had gotten to this point. When had Eric's love for his sister turned into this toxic obsession? When had I become the enemy in my own marriage? As I applied a cool compress to my cheek, I heard Eric's words echoing in my head. Get the hell out. Maybe that was exactly what I needed to do. For my own survival, I needed to escape. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. Could I really leave? Where would I go? What would I do? But as I looked at my reflection once more, seeing the hurt and fear in my own eyes, I knew I had no choice. I couldn't stay here, couldn't continue to live like this. Eric had crossed an unforgivable line, and I owed it to myself to draw my own line in the sand. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. I needed to call someone, needed help to figure out my next steps. As I scrolled through my contacts, I realized how isolated I had become. Most of my friends had drifted away over the years, put off by Eric's controlling behavior or my constant excuses for why I couldn't meet up. I paused on Claw's name, my best friend from college, the one who had always been there for me, even when I pushed her away. I hesitated for a moment, guilt washing over me as I remembered all the times I had ignored her concerns about Eric. But I pushed past the guilt and pressed the call button. As the phone rang, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be Eric's punching bag anymore. Literal or figurative. It was time to reclaim my life, my independence, and my self-respect. The phone continued to ring, and with each passing second, my resolve grew stronger. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms. No more compromising my values. No more sacrificing my well-being for someone else's demands. As I waited for Claw to pick up, I made a silent promise to myself. This was the last time Eric would ever hurt me. From this moment on, I was choosing myself. After ending the call with Claw, I spent the next hour sitting in stunned silence, my heart pounding in my chest as I replayed the morning's events over and over in my mind. The tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed unnaturally loud, marking each passing moment of my shattered reality. I glanced around the living room, taking in all the shared memories that surrounded me. The photos on the walls chronicled our relationship, from our first vacation together in Myrtle Beach to our wedding day on the coast of Maine. The furniture we had picked out together at that little antique shop in Charleston now felt like silent witnesses to the slow decay of our marriage. How had we gone from that happy, in-love couple to this? My eyes fell on the coffee table where a framed photo of Eric and me on our honeymoon sat. I reached out and picked it up, running my fingers over the glass. We were on a gondola in Venice, both of us laughing as Eric tried to take a selfie while the gondolier rolled his eyes in the background. I remembered how carefree and full of hope we were, how certain I was that our love could conquer anything. A drop of water splashed onto the glass and I realized I was crying. I set the photo face down on the table, unable to look at it anymore. This house, once our sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, every corner holding a memory that now felt tainted. I raised my hand to my cheek, still feeling the sting of the coffee on my skin. The pain was a constant reminder of how far we'd fallen, of the line Eric had crossed. This was the final straw. There was no going back from this. With that thought, a strange calm settled over me. The decision I'd been struggling with suddenly became crystal clear. I needed to leave. Not just for now, but for good. Once my decision was made, I sprang into action. I headed to our bedroom, no, my bedroom, and opened the closet. I grabbed the first suitcase I could find, an old blue Samsonite we bought for our honeymoon. As I pulled it out, a cascade of shoeboxes tumbled from the top shelf, spilling their contents across the floor. I knelt to clean up the mess, and a small velvet box caught my eye. With trembling hands, I opened it to find the pearl earrings Eric had given me for our first anniversary. I remembered how proud he'd been, how he'd saved for months to buy them. For a moment, I was tempted to leave them behind, but then I thought, no, these are mine. He doesn't get to keep any part of me anymore. I tossed the earrings into the suitcase and began throwing in as many clothes and essentials as I could manage. My hands were shaking, but my mind was startlingly clear. It was as if a fog had lifted, and I could finally see the path ahead of me. I moved through the house with purpose, gathering the things I couldn't bear to leave behind. My laptop, where I kept all my writing, the old quilt my grandmother had made for me when I left for college, the small box of letters from my parents, who had passed away years ago. Each item I packed felt like a declaration of freedom, or reclaiming of the parts of myself I'd let Eric overshadow. In the kitchen, I hesitated before opening the cabinet above the fridge. Hidden behind a stack of rarely used cookbooks was a small lockbox. I pulled it down and entered the combination, my mother's birthday. Inside was the emergency cash I'd been squirreling away for years. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to get me started. As I stuffed the cash into my purse, I caught sight of my reflection in the microwave door. The woman staring back at me looked both familiar and strange. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and a bruise was forming on her cheek, but there was a determination in her gaze that I hadn't seen in years. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for Eric's behavior. He's just stressed from work, I'd tell myself. He'll calm down once things settle with his family. I had believed that if I just loved him enough, supported him enough, he'd go back to being the man I fell in love with. But now I realized that man might never have existed. The Eric I loved was a construct of my own hopes and dreams, not the reality standing before me. I moved to the study, gathering important documents, my birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. As I rifled through the filing cabinet, I came across our marriage certificate. For a moment, I stared at it, remembering the day we stood before our friends and family promising to love and cherish each other. How hollow those vows seemed now. On impulse, I grabbed a pen and drew a thick black line through our names. It wasn't legally binding, but it felt cathartic. This marriage was over, and I was reclaiming my identity. As I placed the final items into my car, I looked back at the house. We had spent 6 years there building what I thought was a life together. Now, all that remained was bitterness and betrayal. I had given so much of myself to Eric, compromising my dreams, my friendships, even my sense of self. But no more. I thought about leaving a note explaining why I was going, but what was there to say that Eric didn't already know? He had made his choice when he threw that coffee mug at me. Now, I was making mine. My chest felt heavy as I slid into the driver's seat, but there was also an inkling of hope. I wasn't just running away, I was choosing myself. For the first time in years, the road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate. As I turned the key in the ignition, I heard Eric's voice in my head. "Marie is coming here later." The audacity of it all hit me anew. In Eric's world, my sacrifices were just expected. My comfort, my safety, and now my financial independence didn't matter to him. Well, he was in for a surprise when Marie showed up to an empty house. Driving away felt surreal, as though I were leaving another life altogether. The familiar streets of our neighborhood blurred past me, but I wasn't sure where I was going. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't go back. I found myself driving aimlessly, my mind racing with questions. Where would I stay? What would I do for work? How would I start over at 35? The uncertainty was terrifying, but not as terrifying as the thought of going back to that house, to Eric's anger and Marie's demands. After about an hour of driving, I realized I needed a plan. I pulled into the parking lot of a small diner, the kind of place Eric would have turned his nose up at. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, and for the first time that day, I felt my stomach growl. I slid into a booth and ordered a coffee, then pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts looking for someone I could trust. Claw's name jumped out at me again. We hadn't spoken much in the past year, but I remembered how she'd always been there for me, even when I pushed her away. My finger hovered over her name as doubts crept in. What if she didn't want to hear from me? What if she told me I was overreacting? But then I thought of Eric's face, twisted with rage, the coffee mug flying toward me, and I knew I had to try. I pressed the call button and held my breath as it rang. On the third ring, Claw's familiar voice came through. "Lena, is everything okay?" At the sound of her voice, so full of concern even after all this time, I broke down. Through my tears, I recounted everything. The fight with Eric, the coffee mug, my hasty escape. Claw listened without interrupting, only making soft sounds of sympathy and outrage. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Claw said, "Oh, Lena, I'm so sorry you've been going through this, but I'm so proud of you for leaving. You did the right thing." Her words were like a balm to my battered soul. For so long, I had doubted my own perceptions, my own feelings. To have someone validate my experience to tell me I'd done the right thing was more powerful than I could have imagined. As we talked, a plan began to form. Claw knew a lawyer who specialized in helping women escape abusive situations. She offered to set up a meeting for the next day. In the meantime, she insisted I come stay with her. "But what about your family?" I asked, knowing she had 2 young kids. "I don't want to impose." "Don't be ridiculous," Claw said firmly. "Your family too. We have a guest room, and the kids will be thrilled to see their Aunt Lena." By the time the call ended, I had more than just a shoulder to cry on. I had a lifeline. As I hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this. I had support, and for the first time in a long time, I had hope. I finished my coffee, left a generous tip for the waitress, and headed back to my car. As I punched Claw's address into my GPS, I felt a mix of emotions, fear, sadness, but also a growing sense of excitement. This wasn't the end of my story. It was a new beginning. As I pulled up to Claw's house, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The modest 2-story home with its neatly trimmed lawn and cheerful flower beds was so different from the cold, modern house I'd shared with Eric. For a moment, I sat in the car gathering my courage. What if Claw had changed her mind? What if her husband, Tom, didn't want me there? But before I could spiral further, the front door flew open and Claw came rushing out. She looked exactly as I remembered. Curly red hair flying everywhere, green eyes full of warmth. Without hesitation, she pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, Lena," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so glad you're here." As we embraced, I felt something inside me crack. All the fear, anger, and sadness I'd been holding back came flooding out. I sobbed into Claw's shoulder, years of pent-up emotions finally finding release. Claw just held me, rubbing soothing circles on my back. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now. We've got you." When I finally pulled back, wiping my eyes, I saw Tom standing in the doorway. He gave me a gentle smile and a nod. "Welcome, Lena," he said simply. "Come on in. I've got some coffee brewing." Inside, the house was warm and inviting, filled with the controlled chaos that comes with young children. Toys were scattered across the living room floor, and colorful artwork adorned the walls. It was so different from the stiff perfection Eric had always insisted on maintaining. As we settled in the kitchen with steaming mugs of coffee, Claw's kids, Emma and Jack, peeked around the corner. Emma, who was 7, remembered me from previous visits and ran over for a hug. 4-year-old Jack was shy, hiding behind his sister. "Aunt Lena," Emma exclaimed, "are you going to stay with us? Can we have a sleepover in the guest room?" I laughed, surprised by how good it felt. "Not tonight, sweetie, but maybe another time, okay?" As Tom ushered the kids out to give us some privacy, I turned to Claw. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Claw reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's what friends are for. Now, let's figure out our next steps." Over the next few hours, Claw and I talked through everything. She listened without judgment as I shared more details about my relationship with Eric, how things had deteriorated over the years, how I'd lost myself in the process. "I feel so stupid," I confessed, staring into my coffee mug. "I should have left years ago. How did I let it get this bad?" Claw shook her head firmly. "No, Lena, you're not stupid. Abusers are masters at manipulation. They break you down so slowly that you don't even realize it's happening. The important thing is that you've left now." As we talked, Claw helped me start to form a plan. She had already set up an appointment with her lawyer friend Sarah for the next morning. "Sarah specializes in cases like yours," Claw explained. "She'll help you navigate the legal side of things and make sure you're protected." The idea of divorce was terrifying, but also liberating. For so long, I had been trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment, always believing that things would get better. Now, I was finally ready to break free. "What about work?" I asked, suddenly remembering the job I'd left behind. I had been working as a part-time librarian, a job Eric had deemed suitable for me after I gave up my dreams of being a writer. Claw's eyes lit up. "Actually, I might have an idea about that. Remember my cousin Megan? She runs that little bookstore downtown, the Cozy Corner. She mentioned the other day that she's looking for help. It's not much, but it could be a start." The thought of working in a bookstore surrounded by stories and the smell of paper and ink made my heart leap. It was a far cry from the corporate world Eric had always pushed me toward, but it felt right. As the evening wore on, we started making lists. Things I needed to do, people I needed to contact, items I needed to buy. It was overwhelming, but having a plan made me feel more in control than I had in years. "Oh," Claw exclaimed suddenly, "I almost forgot. I have something for you." She disappeared into another room and came back with a small gift bag. Inside was a new cell phone. "I picked it up this afternoon," she explained. "It's a prepaid phone, so Eric can't track it or access the records. You should use this from now on, just to be safe." I stared at the phone, a lump forming in my throat. It was such a small thing, but it represented another step toward freedom. "Thank you," I whispered, unable to find the words to express my gratitude. As we wrapped up our planning session, Claw insisted I take her guest room for the night. "You need a safe place to rest," she said firmly. "We can go to your hotel tomorrow to check out and get your things." That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the quiet sounds of a happy family home, I found myself thinking about Eric. By now, he would have realized I was gone. Would he be worried? Angry? Would he even care? I thought about Marie showing up at Eric's house, expecting to get my credit card. The thought of their shock and confusion gave me a small guilty thrill, but then I remembered Eric's rage, the flying coffee mug, and my resolve hardened. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself thinking about the future. For the first time in years, I asked myself, what do I want my life to look like? Who do I want to be, now that I'm not defined by my role as Eric's wife? The next morning, I woke early, feeling more rested than I had in months. The smell of coffee and bacon wafted up from the kitchen, and I could hear the cheerful chaos of Claw's family starting their day. For a moment, I lay there, savoring the peace. Then I got up, ready to face the day and whatever challenges it might bring. After a quick shower, I joined Claw and her family for breakfast. The kids chattered excitedly about their plans for the day while Tom quizzed them on their homework between bites of toast. It was a scene of such simple, genuine happiness that I felt a pang in my chest. This was what a family should be like. As Claw and I prepared to leave for my meeting with Sarah, the lawyer, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Eric wouldn't let me go without a fight, and there were still so many unknowns, but as I looked at Claw, who had dropped everything to help me, I realized something important. I wasn't alone in this. I had friends, support, and for the first time in a long time, hope. Before we left, I pulled out my new phone and, after a moment's hesitation, typed out a message to Eric. "I'm safe. I'm not coming back. Please don't try to contact me. My lawyer will be in touch." My finger hovered over the send button as doubts crept in. Was I doing the right thing? Should I give him one more chance? Then I remembered the look in Eric's eyes as he threw that mug. The years of manipulation and control, and I knew. This wasn't just about leaving a bad situation. This was about reclaiming my life, my identity, my future. I pressed send. As Claw and I walked out to her car, I felt as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was mine to choose. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. I climbed into the passenger seat, ready to take the next step in my journey. As Claw started the car, she looked over at me with a smile. "Ready?" she asked. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." And with that, we pulled out of the driveway and headed toward my new future. The law office of Sarah Thatcher was nothing like I expected. Instead of the intimidating, sterile environment I'd imagined, it was warm and inviting. Potted plants dotted the corners, and the walls were adorned with colorful, abstract paintings. As Claw and I sat in the waiting area, I found myself studying a particularly vibrant piece of artwork, trying to decipher its meaning. "Lena?" A voice pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "I'm Sarah. Please come in." As we settled into her office, Sarah's eyes zeroed in on the fading bruise on my cheek. Her expression softened. "Claw filled me in on the basics," she said gently, "but I'd like to hear everything from you, if that's okay." For the next hour, I poured out my story. Sarah listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarification or jotting down notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her face a mix of sympathy and determination. "Lena," she said, her voice firm but kind, "what happened to you is not okay. It's abuse, plain and simple, but you've taken the first and hardest step by leaving. Now, let's talk about how we're going to protect you and your future." Over the next few hours, Sarah laid out a plan. We would file for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences and Eric's abusive behavior. She explained the process of obtaining a restraining order and how we could potentially secure temporary alimony to help me get back on my feet. "What about the house?" I asked, thinking of the home Eric and I had shared for 6 years. Sarah's eyes gleamed. "Actually, I have an idea about that. Given Eric's behavior, we might be able to get you exclusive use of the house temporarily. It could give you some leverage in the divorce proceedings." The thought of returning to that house made my stomach churn, but I understood the strategic value. Still, there was something else nagging at me. "Eric's sister, Marie," I said hesitantly. "She's been a big part of our problems. Eric said she was coming to the house to get my credit card." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "We need to address that too. Financial abuse is a serious issue. We'll make sure to protect your assets and credit." As we wrapped up the meeting, I felt a mix of emotions, fear, uncertainty, but also a growing sense of empowerment. Sarah had given me a roadmap, a way forward that I couldn't see before. "Remember," Sarah said as we stood to leave, "you're stronger than you know. It won't be easy, but you can do this. And you don't have to do it alone." Back at Claw's house, we sat at the kitchen table going over everything Sarah had told us. Claw was busy making a list of things we needed to do, her teacher's organizational skills coming in handy. "Okay," she said, tapping her pen against the paper. "We need to gather all your important documents, change your passwords, and start documenting everything. Oh, and we should probably think about getting you some new clothes and essentials." I nodded, feeling overwhelmed but grateful for her help. "Claw," I said softly, "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all this." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to. That's what friends are for." Then she grinned. "Besides, I always knew Eric was a jerk. It's about time someone took him down a peg." We spent the rest of the afternoon making calls and sending emails. I canceled my joint credit cards, changed the passwords on all my online accounts, and even set up a new email address. With each step, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. As evening approached, Claw's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked at me with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "It's Megan," she said, "about the bookstore job. She wants to know if you can come in for an interview tomorrow." My heart raced. The idea of working in a bookstore had always been a dream of mine, one that Eric had dismissed as impractical. Now Now, here was a chance to make it a reality. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Tell her yes. That night, as I lay in the guest bed, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. I thought about Eric, wondering if he was worried about me or just angry. I thought about Marie, imagining her shock when she arrived at an empty house. Part of me felt guilty, but a larger part felt free. The next morning, I woke early, nervous energy thrumming through me. Claw helped me pick out an outfit for the interview, a simple blouse and skirt combination that made me feel both professional and true to myself. The cozy corner bookstore was everything I'd imagined and more, shelves lined with books stretched from floor to ceiling, the air filled with the comforting smell of paper and ink. Megan, Claw's cousin, was a bubbly woman with a pixie cut and an infectious laugh. "So," she said after we chatted for a while about books and my experience, "Claw tells me you're in a bit of a tough spot." I hesitated, unsure how much to share, but Megan's kind eyes and open expression made me feel safe. "I'm leaving my husband," I said, the words still feeling strange on my tongue. "I need a fresh start." Megan nodded, her expression serious. "Well, I can't offer you much in terms of salary, at least not to start," she said. "But what I can offer is a safe place to work, flexible hours, and the chance to be surrounded by books all day. How does that sound?" It sounded like heaven. "When can I start?" I asked, unable to keep the eagerness out of my voice. Megan laughed. "How about next Monday? That'll give you some time to sort things out." As I left the bookstore clutching my new employee handbook, I felt a surge of hope. For the first time in years, I was making decisions for myself, charting my own course. But my newfound optimism was short-lived. When I returned to Claw's house, I found her pacing in the kitchen, her face tight with worry. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart sinking. Claw hesitated, then handed me her phone. On the screen was a series of text messages from Eric. My blood ran cold as I read them. "Where is she?" The first one demanded. "I know you're hiding her." The messages grew increasingly aggressive, culminating in a final threat. "If she doesn't come home by tonight, I'm coming to get her myself." I felt the room spin, my knees threatening to give out. Claw steadied me, guiding me to a chair. "It's okay," she said firmly. "He doesn't know you're here. We won't let him near you." But I knew Eric. Once he set his mind to something, he wouldn't stop. The thought of him showing up here, endangering Claw and her family, made me sick. "I need to go," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't put you in danger." Claw shook her head vehemently. "No way. We're in this together." Then, with a determined glint in her eye, she added, "I have an idea." She quickly dialed a number. "Sarah, it's Claw. We need your help." "How quickly can you get that restraining order?" As Claw explained the situation to Sarah, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. I thought about everything that had happened in the past few days, leaving Eric, reconnecting with Claw, meeting with Sarah, the job at the bookstore. I'd come so far. I couldn't let Eric drag me back now. A plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, perhaps even a bit cruel, but as I thought about Eric's threats, about all the years of control and manipulation, I knew it was necessary. When Claw hung up the phone, I took a deep breath. "I have an idea," I said, "but I'm going to need your help." As I outlined my plan, I saw Claw's eyes widen. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. "Oh, Lena," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "I always knew you had it in you." For the rest of the day, we worked on putting our plan into action. We made calls, sent emails, and prepared for what was to come. As evening approached, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I was ready. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across Claw's living room. I sat by the window, watching the street outside. Soon, Eric would make his move, but this time, I would be ready. This time, I would be the one in control. The quiet before the storm was almost over, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face whatever came next, on my own terms. The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart began to race as I peered through the curtains. Sure enough, it was Eric's sleek black Audi with Marie in the passenger seat. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was it, the moment of truth. "They're here," I said to Claw, who was sitting on the couch trying to look casual despite the tension in the room. She nodded, giving me a reassuring smile. "Remember, you've got this. We're right here with you." I watched as Eric and Marie got out of the car, their faces a mixture of anger and smug confidence. Eric was wearing his favorite power suit, the one he always wore when he wanted to intimidate someone. Marie, in her designer dress and high heels, looked ready for a night out rather than a family confrontation. As they approached the front door, I could hear their voices carrying through the evening air. "I can't believe she had the nerve to just leave like that," Marie was saying, her voice shrill with indignation. "After everything you've done for her." Eric's response was too low for me to hear, but the set of his jaw told me all I needed to know about his mood. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Claw squeezed my hand one last time before going to answer it. I heard her voice, cool and collected. "Eric, Marie, what a surprise." "Cut the crap, Claw," Eric growled. "Where is she?" "I know Lena is here." "Why don't you come in?" Claw replied, her tone neutral. "We can discuss this civilly." I heard their footsteps in the hallway getting closer. My palms were sweating, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had a plan, and I was going to stick to it. Eric burst into the living room first, his eyes immediately landing on me. For a moment, I saw a flicker of relief in his expression, quickly replaced by anger. "Lena," he said, his voice dropping dangerously low, Eric's voice cold and sharp. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I stood up, straightening my spine and looking him directly in the eye. "I'm leaving you, Eric," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Our marriage is over." Marie gasped dramatically, while Eric's face flushed red with rage. "You can't just leave," he spat. "You're my wife. You have responsibilities, obligations." "My only obligation is to myself," I replied, feeling a surge of strength. "I'm done being your punching bag, Eric. I'm done watching you prioritize your sister's whims over our marriage." Marie stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "How dare you? Eric has always taken care of you, you ungrateful little—" "That's enough," Claw interrupted, her voice sharp. "This is between Lena and Eric. You don't get a say in this, Marie." Eric turned to Claw, his fists clenched at his sides. "Stay out of this. This is family business." "Family?" I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. "Is that what you call it when you throw coffee mugs at my head? When you demand I hand over my credit card to your sister?" Eric had the grace to look uncomfortable for a moment, but he quickly rallied. "You're exaggerating. It was just a little argument. If you just come home, we can work this out." I shook my head, feeling a mix of sadness and resolve. "No, Eric. There's no working this out. I've made my decision." "You can't just decide that," Eric shouted, taking a step toward me. "I won't let you ruin everything we've built." As Eric advanced, I felt a flicker of fear, but before he could get any closer, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's far enough, Mr. Campbell." We all turned to see Mr. Thatcher standing in the doorway, his presence commanding attention. He was every inch the professional lawyer, from his perfectly pressed suit to his stern expression. Eric's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" Mr. Thatcher stepped into the room, his movements deliberate and calm. "I'm Lena's attorney, Mr. Thatcher, and I suggest you take a step back from my client." The shock on Eric's face was almost comical. He looked from Mr. Thatcher to me, then back again. "Attorney?" Eric scoffed. "Lena, what is this?" I took a deep breath, drawing strength from Mr. Thatcher's presence. "It's exactly what it looks like, Eric. I'm filing for divorce." Marie let out a dramatic gasp. "Divorce? You can't be serious. Eric, do something." But Eric seemed frozen in place, his face a mask of disbelief. Mr. Thatcher took advantage of his silence. "Mrs. Campbell has retained my services to handle the divorce proceedings," he said, his tone professional but firm. "All future communication regarding this matter should go through me." Eric finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "Lena, you can't just decide to get a divorce without talking to me first." "I believe the coffee mug you threw at her face was the end of that conversation, Mr. Campbell," Mr. Thatcher replied coolly. Eric's face paled. That was an accident. I didn't mean—" "Save it for the court, Eric," I interrupted. "I'm done listening to your excuses." Marie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly piped up. "What about me? What about my needs? Eric promised me." Mr. Thatcher turned his steely gaze on her. "Mrs. Campbell's finances are no longer your concern, Miss Campbell. Any agreements you had with your brother do not extend to my client's assets." Marie's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. Eric, however, was regaining his composure. His shock was giving way to anger once more. "You think you can just walk away?" he growled. "After everything I've done for you, everything I've given you." I felt a surge of anger of my own. "Given me? What exactly have you given me, Eric? A life where I have to walk on eggshells, where I've had to give up my dreams, my friends, my sense of self. That's not a gift. That's a prison." My words seemed to hit Eric like a physical blow. He staggered back slightly, his face a mixture of confusion and hurt. For a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with years ago, but then his expression hardened once more. "Fine," he spat. "If this is how you want to play it, then let's play. I'll fight you every step of the way, Lena. You'll get nothing." Mr. Thatcher stepped forward, placing himself between Eric and me. "I wouldn't advise that course of action, Mr. Campbell. My client has substantial evidence of your abusive behavior. If you choose to fight this, all of that will come to light in court. I suggest you consider your options carefully." Eric's face went pale, then red with fury. He opened his mouth to retort, but Mr. Thatcher cut him off. "I think we're done here," he said firmly. "I'll be in touch with the divorce papers. Until then, I suggest you refrain from contacting Mrs. Campbell directly." Eric looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Mr. Thatcher's expression must have made him think better of it. He turned to me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and something that looked almost like fear. "This isn't over, Lena," he said, his voice low and threatening. I met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Eric, it is." With a final glare, Eric stormed out of the house, Marie trailing behind him like a dejected puppy. As the door slammed shut behind them, I felt my knees go weak with relief. Claw was at my side in an instant, supporting me as I sank onto the couch. "You did it," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, Lena." Mr. Thatcher cleared his throat softly. "You handled that very well, Mrs. Campbell. It's not easy to stand up to an abuser, but you did so with admirable strength." I looked up at him, feeling a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you, Mr. Thatcher. I couldn't have done it without your help." He nodded, a small smile softening his stern features. "This is just the beginning, but you've taken the hardest step. We'll take care of the rest together." As Mr. Thatcher gathered his things to leave, I sat on the couch trying to process everything that had just happened. The confrontation I'd been dreading for days was over, and I'd survived. More than that, I'd stood my ground. Claw brought me a cup of tea, settling beside me on the couch. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. I took a sip of the warm liquid, letting it soothe my frayed nerves. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Relieved, I think. Scared. But also free." Claw squeezed my hand. "That's normal. It's a big change, but you're not alone in this. Remember that." As the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, I felt the weight of everything I'd been through settle on my shoulders. But along with the sadness and fear, there was something else, a spark of hope, small but bright, burning in my chest. For the first time in years, I was free to shape my own future. The road ahead would be challenging, but as I sat there with Claw, sipping tea and watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following my confrontation with Eric passed in a blur of paperwork, meetings, and emotional upheavals. Each day brought new challenges, but also small victories that I cherished. I found myself marking these milestones, no matter how minor they seemed. The first night I slept through without nightmares, the first time I laughed without feeling guilty, the first day I didn't think about Eric at all. Claw had insisted I stay with her family until I got back on my feet, despite my protests about imposing. "Nonsense," she'd said firmly. "That's what friends are for. Besides, the kids love having you here." And it was true. Emma and Jack had taken to calling me Aunt Lena and including me in their games and stories. Their innocent affection was a balm to my battered spirit. My job at the Cozy Corner bookstore quickly became my sanctuary. Megan was the patient and understanding boss, always ready with a kind word or a cup of tea when I seemed overwhelmed. The quiet rhythm of shelving books, recommending titles to customers, and losing myself in the pages of a new story helped ground me when everything else felt chaotic. One rainy afternoon, about a month after I'd left Eric, I was restocking the fiction section when a familiar title caught my eye, The Awakening by Kate Chopin. I remembered reading it in college, the story of Edna Pontellier's journey to self-discovery resonating with me even then. On impulse, I pulled the book from the shelf and began to read. As I immersed myself in Edna's story once again, I felt a connection I hadn't experienced in years. Her struggle for independence, her desire to live life on her own terms, it all felt achingly familiar. When I reached the part where Edna declares, I would give up the unessential. I would give my money, I would give my life for my children, but I wouldn't give myself. Tears sprang to my eyes. Megan found me like that, crying silently in the middle of the fiction aisle. Without a word, she sat down next to me, offering a tissue and a comforting presence. When I'd calmed down enough to explain, she listened thoughtfully. You know, she said after a moment, books have a way of finding us when we need them most. Maybe this is your awakening, Lena. Her words stayed with me long after my shift ended. That night, as I lay in bed in Claw's guest room, I found myself thinking about all the parts of myself I'd given up during my marriage to Eric, my writing, my dreams of traveling, even my favorite foods, all sacrificed in the name of keeping the peace, of being the wife he wanted me to be. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I dug out my old laptop from the bottom of my suitcase, and for the first time in ages, I began to write. The words poured out of me, messy, raw, and real. I wrote about my marriage, about the slow erosion of my happiness. It wasn't pretty or polished, but it was mine. As the days turned into weeks, I fell into a new routine. Mornings were for writing, pouring my thoughts and feelings onto the page before the rest of the world woke up. Then I'd head to the bookstore, losing myself in the world of literature and the quiet companionship of fellow book lovers. Evenings were spent with Claw and her family, or sometimes just by myself, rediscovering old hobbies and interests I'd long neglected. Mr. Thatcher kept me updated on the divorce proceedings. Eric, true to his word, was fighting every step of the way, but with Mr. Thatcher's guidance and the evidence we'd gathered, I felt confident in our case. Still, each update brought a mix of anxiety and relief. Anxiety over the confrontation, relief that I was one step closer to true freedom. One Saturday, about 2 months after I'd left, Claw convinced me to join her for a yoga class. It'll be good for you, she insisted. Help you reconnect with yourself. I was skeptical, but I agreed to give it a try. The studio was warm and inviting, with soft music playing and the scent of lavender in the air. As we went through the poses, I found myself struggling, not just physically, but emotionally. Years of tension and stress had left my body rigid and unyielding, but as I breathed through each movement, I felt something start to shift. Near the end of the class, as we lay in Savasana, the instructor's words washed over me. You are strong, you are worthy, you are enough. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed it. After class, flushed and slightly sore but feeling more alive than I had in years, I turned to Claw. Thank you, I said simply. She smiled, understanding in her eyes, and squeezed my hand. That night, I had a dream about Eric. In it, he was shouting at me, his face red with anger, but I couldn't hear his words. It was like watching a silent film. I woke up with a start, my heart racing, but as I lay there in the dark, I realized something. For the first time, his anger didn't terrify me. I felt sad for him, for the man he'd become, but I no longer felt responsible for his emotions. The next morning, I shared this revelation with Claw over coffee. She listened thoughtfully, then said, You know, Lena, I think you're ready for the next step. What do you mean? I asked, curious. I think it's time for you to find your own place, she said gently. Not because we don't love having you here, but because I think you're ready to stand on your own 2 feet. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Could I really do it? Live on my own, support myself? But as I thought about it, I realized Claw was right. It was time. The process of finding an apartment was both exciting and overwhelming. There were so many things to consider: location, cost, safety. But with Claw's help and my newfound confidence, I finally found a small studio apartment not far from the bookstore. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Moving day was a whirlwind of activity. Claw, Tom, and even the kids pitched in to help. By evening, my meager possessions were unpacked, and my new space was starting to feel like home. As we all sat on the floor eating pizza and laughing, I felt a surge of gratitude for these people who had become my family. After everyone left, I stood in the middle of my new apartment, taking it all in. The second-hand furniture we'd picked up at thrift stores. The few treasured possessions I'd brought from my life with Eric. The new things I'd bought just for myself. It all came together to create a space that was uniquely mine. I walked to the window looking out at the city lights. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to think about the future, not just the immediate future of divorce proceedings and building a new life, but the long-term future. What did I want? Who did I want to be? As I stood there, I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Life is a story, and you're the author. For so long, I'd let others dictate my story, Eric, his family, societal expectations. But now, the pen was in my hand. I could write any story I wanted. I turned back to my apartment, my eyes landing on the small desk in the corner where my laptop sat. That's when an idea began to form in my mind. Maybe it was time to revisit that novel I'd always dreamed of writing, not for Eric, not for anyone else, but for me. With a smile, I sat down at the desk and opened my laptop. The blank page no longer seemed intimidating, but full of possibility. I took a deep breath and began to type. Chapter 1. The Awakening. As the words flowed onto the page, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was still uncertain, and I knew there would be challenges to face. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, and there were still days when the weight of everything I'd been through threatened to overwhelm me. But sitting there in my new home, writing my own story, I knew one thing for certain. I was going to be okay. More than okay, I was going to thrive. This wasn't just a new chapter in my life, it was a whole new book, and I couldn't wait to see how it would unfold. As the first light of dawn began to peek through my window, I finally stopped writing. I'd lost track of time, lost in the world of my story. I stretched, feeling the satisfying ache of muscles that had been still for too long, and made my way to the kitchen to brew some coffee. Standing there, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, I raised my mug in a silent toast to new beginnings, to rediscovered strength, to the endless possibilities that lay ahead, to my new chapter. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that we are stronger than we think. For so long, I let fear and doubt hold me back, believing I was trapped, powerless. But the truth is, we always have a choice. It may not be easy, it may not be without pain, but choosing ourselves, our happiness, our freedom, is always worth it. Life will throw challenges our way, people will try to define us, but we are the authors of our own stories. No one else holds the pen. If you're reading this and feel stuck, afraid, or lost, know that you have the power to change your life. Start small, take one step, then another. One day, you'll look back and realize you're no longer just surviving, you're thriving. And that, I promise you, is the most beautiful feeling in the world. Thank you for listening, and good luck.